Good morning. This is Adam Sellers with CentralReach. Hope everybody's doing well today. I guess good afternoon could be applicable in some cases too. I'm going to wait just a couple more minutes just to see if anybody else shows up, and then we'll kind of run through the ins and outs of the billing module. Um, Most of the stuff we're going to cover today is based upon, that billing module. So the dollar sign at the top of your screen, if you're logged in, and then all of the different little buttons down there. It'll be a little bit about workflow, a little bit about features. We'll try and mix it up. If you do have any questions, one of the things I wanted to bring up is there is a questions section on the webinar control panel that you can ask questions. I'll try and get to those based upon content and where we're at and what we're doing. By all means, if you have something that I don't cover, please feel free to open a support ticket, reach out to your customer success leads. That's what we're here for. Last couple things to be said about what we're going to go over today is within the billing module, don't forget that some of the items, some of the buttons that we will see are permission controlled. The account I'm logged into is just my demo account, and so I have all permissions there. Secondly, that some of those items are controlled by feature keys, meaning that you pay for certain things. There's a basic set, and then there's a more advanced, what we call RCM set, revenue cycle management. So you might not have some of the buttons because your organization doesn't have them, period. Now, it doesn't mean you can't have them. It doesn't mean you can't add them. Please, once again, if you have questions, reach out to support or your customer success leads, and they can help you out with that stuff. I'm going to turn on my screen in just a moment, and then you'll see my demo account. And like I said, I'll probably wait for just about one more minute, start about 5 after. You should be seeing my CentralReach account at this time. Just so I can get an idea of who all is here, I do have a couple little polls that I made. I'll pop up the first one on your screen now. And this one's just basically how long have you been billing in CentralReach, just so I have an idea of kind of where our audience is at. It's always kind of interesting to see. Excellent. Thanks so much for your participation. Go ahead and close that up. So that was pretty cool. Let me know about 40% of you are less than 6 months. It's pretty even split in the very, very early stages and the 2 to 6 month stage. And then about 60% of you are over 6 months. That's always cool. Those of you that are newer to the system, the learning curve is steep. Don't be alarmed if you feel like some of this stuff is just going to be flying by. There's a lot of stuff that the system does. Those of you that have been around a while, hopefully I can show you one or two things that you haven't seen or they're a little bit newer. So at least you can pick up one little item today. We are recording the session. The session will be available via, I can't remember if it's going to go out in the GoToMeeting, the post email, and or it will be posted on our webinars page within a couple days. So thanks so much and welcome. So what we're going to go over today, once again, is that billing module. And so the billing module, when I say that, is anything underneath the dollar sign up top. So each one of these icons across the top we refer to as modules. They all control certain functionality within the system. I'm going to start way down at the bottom. Some of you may not even see anything below this line, but the foundation of how the billing system pulls data all starts down here and then builds on itself through the schedule, through authorizations, et cetera, and then finally culminates in somebody converting a timesheet, converting that entry that you then bill from on the billing screen. So we'll hit all these items here today. Once again, don't forget some of these buttons will be permission-based, others will be feature-based, and whether or not your organization has that feature enabled and is paying for that one. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump down to service codes. So inside service codes, this is the section where you set up your codes. A lot of you, when you come through implementation, you give us a big old list of your codes. We come in here and we set them up. This is the foundation, once again, for how the code works. Remember, we define a lot of things here about the code. We tell the system how many units is equal, or how many minutes is equal to 1 unit, so the system can thereby do the math. So those of you that are starting out, we always talk about, please early on scrutinize very heavily all of these functions that are happening, all these little mathematical pieces, because if they're not set up right initially, what will happen is those problems that you might be seeing will propagate through the system mathematically and just continue to compound on top of each other. So please check your billing screen. But ultimately, the power and the control here in the service codes is what's driving the whole system. A lot of things we always talk about here these are how the codes are set up. These are the rules. They're rules-based codes. You can have codes. One single code can be mapped to multiple fee schedules, so multiple payers with multiple different rates. The big caveat there is if you have a code that is used by a payer in a different way, meaning let's say we have an H2019 that's typically a 15-minute code, or like an H2030 or something that's a 15-minute code with one payer, but with another payer, it follows a 60-minute code rule. In that scenario, yes, you have to have two completely different codes built into the system. They would both appear identically on the screen. And usually what happens is people will describe them differently in this description section. So we're going to real quickly kind of race through all the different settings within an individual code. When we first look at the screen, a couple things about this, as well as the billing screen and other screens that you will see throughout the system. The portion to the left of the colon is what we carry over to a claim. That is the code. The portion to the right of the colon, that is just an internal description so that your staff or yourself know what that code is. So you can think of the stuff to the left of the code when we select on it, or the code line itself, as being, this is what we're going to put on a claim. This is what we're going to put on an invoice. Invoices, you can have the code and the description that come through together. When we send it out on a claim more specifically, we're going to just drop it in with what that code line is. So code, description, free-form description, you describe it. I usually tell people whatever makes sense to you. Enforce rate. This is how we are going to create our first level of security against this code. How and who can use it. So default means that anybody who can log into the system can access this code. It will just appear in their list of codes whenever they go to schedule an appointment. Enforce custom provider rate. That's kind of that first tier. And this means you're going to give the system a list of providers, and you're going to associate them with these service codes that they're allowed to use. Generally, what we see is about 90% of people set up items and codes with this second choice. Usually be a handful of default. As we move down into these last two sections, they get more restrictive. We usually see people steer away from these. They do work fantastically for certain things that you might want to do, but they do create a different style of restriction that is not always covered very thoroughly in implementation, because it is so nuanced and it is so restrictive. Enforce custom client rate means that only this code can be used with specific clients that you specify. And then obviously the most restrictive, this code can only be used with this stated provider and this stated client. Once again, super restrictive. Calculation type, as we move into this, don't forget every entry in the system has basically two loops operating on it simultaneously. There's a billing loop and there's a payroll loop. This is telling the system how we're working with the data from a billing perspective and from a payroll perspective. Once again, 98% of it is the first two. Probably of that, 95% of it is bill by units, pay by time for those of you using insurance. Places we still see bill by time, those of you that might be billing school districts, regional centers, private pay, where you want to prorate the billing to the minute. Default units, where do we start counting? When we use this code, do we start counting at 1, 2, 15, 100? Usually what you're going to see in here is 1. Default service location. This is a starting point for POS when people go to convert. If you set this, this will be a starting point. Doesn't mean people can't change it. Doesn't mean it can't be modified, just as it provides a starting point. Minutes per unit. This is how the system counts from 1 unit to 2 units, from 2 units to 3 units, so on and so forth. If you have a flat rate code, leave this blank, and then the system will not count from 1 to 2 ever. It will always be 1, and then you could input your flat rate. Rounding, it will default to rounding it halfway. Obviously, only most critical for your even numbered minutes per unit. If you have a 15, it doesn't matter. It follows the 7/8 rule where it can never be in between. It's always greater than or less than half. Half plus 1 is something you can specify. Default minutes. How many minutes of an appointment should this code fill when you bring it into an appointment? Just by default. Modifiers. This provides a suggested modifier for converting. This will not force anything into the timesheet. If you want to do that, those are your modifier groups. Now, as we move down into validation, this is where we start talking about all the codes and all of the little fields that appear in our timesheets. Location, POS code, service address, physical address. Most of the choices here, not needed, optional, required. Not needed, the field does not appear. Optional means it appears, you do not have to fill it out. Required means it appears and you have to place a value in it. Once again, doesn't mean it's the right value, just that it has to have a value in the box. When we move down into service notes and admin notes, if we have these set to required, they require 140 characters. Used to be what we say, it has to be a full tweet. Nowadays, a full tweet is bigger, but our system still says 140 characters before you can save. And then down here, as we move into restrictions, this is kind of that next layer of restriction. Does this code require an authorization to be in the system to be used? Most of the time, you're going to say yes. This now, an authorization, remember, comes from the client side. So this is how we're now saying, I'm going to link this code to a client and say the authorization is required. And then up top here, if I set this to enforce custom provider rate, this means I'm going to have a list of providers that can use this code. So the one-to-one match is coming from the authorization existing and the provider being linked to the code. If either one of those conditions are not met, the code won't show up to be used. Last couple items, these are usually going to be checked by default. Single timesheet conversion only can convert once from the schedule. Requires schedule conversion. What this means is that you cannot bypass the schedule. You have to use this code on the schedule and convert from there to access it. There's always been an option up here called Add New Timesheet. If any of you have been around for a really long time, some companies solely use this. They completely bypass the schedule. Not the best way to use the system these days, but it exists. But when you say requires schedule conversion, this code will not be available if somebody clicked on this as an option to bypass the schedule. Restrict early timesheet conversion. This means that I cannot convert my appointment prior to the time on my computer saying it is at or after the time of the appointment I'm about to convert. So right now, if I had an appointment at 11:30, my computer says 11:15 Mountain Time, it won't let me convert. Grace period. This is another way we create control on the codes. When we say lock grace period, this is how many days after the date of service do I have to convert this appointment without asking an administrator for help. Last one, show client rates. If you're going to use our invoices and you're going to have your clients log in and view those invoices, and or they can pay from there now as well, as long as you have a merchant account set up in CentralReach, you have to check this box so that they can see the rates on the codes. If you don't check this box, they will log in, they can see the invoice, but they won't see any dollar amounts associated with it. So once again, programmatically, this is how we're starting out the system, setting up these codes so that we can use these codes throughout the system. We then set up default rates. That's what defaults here are your bill rates, and then rates here, the second column, this is how many employees and or clients do I have linked to a code. They're just numerical representations. If I click on either one of them, it's very cool. It will take me to custom rates, show me the codes, show me who's attached to them. If I come in and do the same thing on fee schedule rates, it would pull up same code once again, and it's going to show me all the different fee schedule rates inside the system associated with this. Now, this one is one code, but it has multiple different modifier groups so that it can be used in different ways within that conversion. Service codes. Notes templates. Please don't confuse these with our newer notes and forms that are like your buildable PDFs. This is a very old school way to get data embedded in the timesheet as like little checkboxes or little text fields, similar to how like our little admin note and service notes. Excuse me. Some companies will still use these. I've seen companies, in particular in California, where litigation is more of an issue. They will use this to say, under penalty of perjury, I say I did my stuff and I took my breaks. And you can make a very simple yes, no. You can make this required or optional. It can be a little checkbox inside the timesheet. So what does this look like? Let me see if I can find the page I pulled it up on. Here we go. So if I have a timesheet and I associate it with a specific code embedded in the code, they will get this little pop-up. I can make this required or not. I can make yes, no, multi-answer, etc., little text fields. But you could do this so that you get a little check so that somebody goes, yeah, I did this. So once again, super old school, pretty formal in that it's not flexible in interaction. It's just there on the timesheet. And those are the notes templates. And then you would associate them with a specific code, who can use it, who doesn't use it, which codes use it, etc. Those are these old school notes templates. You can use them in conjunction with notes and forms as well. So they can give you some more flexibility if you're looking for something within that timesheet. Fee schedules. Always like to tell people, think of a fee schedule as a folder to put your rates in. Usually for your fee schedules, you have lots of them. Each fee schedule might share codes. So for example, if I'm using, T codes or 95703 or whatever it is across multiple pairs, well, it might be that when I build the service codes, I build that one time, as long as the rule for that code, once again, applies itself equally to all of the different pairs, you can do that just fine. But I need to build a folder to specifically put my Aetna rate for that code, my Anthem rate, my Easter Seals rate, Primera rate, whatever it might be. This is where you build the folder. Now, the way the system works is you take this is your folder where you build that rate. So the system knows, hey, if I have multiple potential rates associated with one singular code, how do I know where to grab the rate? That's what the by payer tab does here. So when we say by payer, this is where we create mapping. When we talk about mapping, it's an association. How do we say, when I do X, give me Y? This is what it is. So the way we read this by payer screen is on the left-hand side, there is some client somewhere in the system using every payer listed here on the left. If I click the little triangles, it will show me the little drop down with the second line of all of those items. Remember, when you set up a pair, top line is this top one, and then this would be the second line. Then on the right, what I would do is I would say, hey, if a client has Primera Blue Cross standard, I want them to pull over which fee schedule rate. And that's where I'm selecting now my respective folder that I'm containing all those rates inside of. This is how we create these associations. If you ever have employees converting, they say, hey, I'm going to convert my timesheet. And every time I do it, it asks me, which one do I want? Which rate? Which code? This is a lot of times where this is coming from. If the rate isn't in the system defined against this pair and the code someone is using has multiple rates, the system needs to know where to map it. If it doesn't have that mapping, it's going to ask the user to interact with the code and select which rate. Now, will they see the rate? Not always. Once again, that's permission based, but it will ask them a question of what they want to do. Drive rates. Drive rates in the system can be set up here. This would then pull in the data to each individual timesheet. You have to set up each individual employee with what their provider rate would be, hourly for travel time, and then mileage. If you just want to track the data and not have the system generate any rates against it, you don't necessarily need to pull it into here. System, you can show those fields based upon your service code setup, that little drive rate section. It opens up those boxes to allow data to be saved. This is going to allow you to specify somebody's rate. Additionally, this is also, if you're using the payroll module, this is how we output rates and stuff within that. One huge note about this first choice that says set default rate, 99.9% of you do not want this. What a lot of people think when they first come in here is when I click on this, oh, hey, this is saying, hey, pay my employees $10 an hour and 54 cents a mile. please note what it says right here. Default drive rates clients are charged. If you put in a rate here, this means every client that there's some drive time and or mileage associated on those entries, please add this to their bill. If you're billing an insurance company, it would add it to the total AR for those line items. You probably do not want this. Most of the time we see people use this, it is in error, and what they really are intending to do is set up all their individual employees. They just think that they see this and they go, hey, we could do all employees this way. Each employee is separate, and that's why we set it up separately to the employee. When you do set up an employee, you'll notice that you get a client and or a provider. You can just do one of these or the other. So you can just set up the provider like I did here with Katie Safety. And when I do this, I just put in the provider name. It only opens up the provider boxes to be filled in. If I want to edit anything, I can edit it, delete it. You can also change the rates right here. If you do so, you'll notice it highlights. You can do a whole bunch at once. And if I click Save Changes, it would save those changes. Last one here, miscellaneous. There is one choice in here, and that is to use agreed rates. A couple notes about this. It is very simply a toggle. You can toggle it on, you can toggle it off. Obviously, if you toggle it one way or the other, in theory, you'd probably want to keep it that way. Notes about this: when you toggle it on and hit update, all of the agreed rates have always been working inside the system from day one. So this would just turn them on so that they're visible. On the billing screen, you get a couple extra columns. You get a billed rate column, an agreed rate column, total billed charges, total agreed charges, and we start pulling all of that data in. So if we go to the billing screen here and I only have a billed rate, since I turned on agreed rates, if I refresh this screen, it will then take on those new properties. And what I'm going to see here is that I'm going to have a billed rate and an agreed rate. And then the system is going to do the math for total billed charges, total agreed charges. It will then perform a calculated adjustment. This is a system-made adjustment. This is the system just doing the math. If you tell us both your rates, we can tell you what the difference is. But what we will put in the AR, this one has a payment on it, that's why it's showing differently. So it show the total owed amount to be based upon the agreed rate and not the billed rate. Additional notes: when you toggle this on, if you have the receivable screen and or the sales screen, it will reflect agreed rates. A lot of people do like this because if they're coming into the system and they want to use the agreed rates, they want the receivables and the sales to reflect that versus the inflated, par rates. So, or the usual and customary. So you can turn that on. You get more columns of data. It just once again depends on how you're running your company and how you want to display data. But it is available. That is the only choice there. You can toggle it back off. If I click that and update, go back to this screen. If I refresh the screen, those columns will disappear. So it's the basic gist of everything under that gray line. Now, once we set up everything under the gray line, usually what happens then is people start setting up their authorizations to use the codes, and then the codes pull into the appointments get converted, and then everything gets saved into the system. Once we save data to the system, it comes into the timesheets and billing screen. Real quick note there for those of you that are newer to the system: timesheets and billing are identical. It's largely about perspective. Timesheets is going to display the exact same data, row for row, column for column. The only difference is, once again, is that perspective. So when I'm on the billing screen, I am seeing all of this dollar amounts, these rates and charges and everything. These are going to be the perspective of my bill perspective, my revenue. On the timesheet screen, same data once again, row for row, but what we see there is if we have programmed pay rates in the system will display pay rates so your employees could view those. Don't have to use pay rates in the system. Some people like it, some people don't. A lot of times it depends on how you're running your business and how you want those things to be shown. Pros and cons to everything. The only reason I like to bring that up is if employees come to, they will always talk about the timesheet screen. Why do they always talk about the timesheet? Because that's the screen they all see. In order to convert, we have to give them the permission to see the timesheet screen, because the end result of saving my schedule, converting, is creation of a timesheet and or billing entry. Now that you see both sides of the screens, meaning the billing screen and the timesheet screen, I want to just remind you that the billing entry number is identical on both screens. It literally is the same piece of data. So why do we keep it separate? Well, it has to do with that perspective and what do you want people to see. Additionally, this screen has much more functionality built into it from the billing perspective. Out of curiosity, as we're moving on, I'm just curious under the $ module, which of these buttons do y'all have? You can check more than one too, but I'm just curious moving forward. Once again, as we're doing that little poll that I sent out, looks like most of you have everything. Okay. This screen, like I said, is much more filterable. We always talk about anything you see in blue usually means you can do something with it. So if I click on this, it's a filter. If I click on this, it's a filter. If I click on this, it's a filter. This, so on and so forth. The horizontal blue lines, super powerful. Once again, dynamic filters. We've also added a couple under service and auth and location. The really cool thing that makes these dynamic filters so powerful is that when we use these dynamic filters based upon the date range I have selected and or any filter I have added in, these will all adjust themselves to only what's available right now. I don't need to know that we work with 100 different providers. I don't need to know we have 1,000 clients. Right now, in the date range I have selected here up at the top, and I did this specifically because this is where I have data in my demo account. Quick reminder, it will always default to the last 7 days. But if you need to change it, go ahead and change it. Primary driving force on this screen too, if I forgot to mention, is this date range. That's where it starts. After that, you can choose what you want to see. Now, the very cool thing about these pop-up lists, aside from being the dynamic list, they're also filters. If I click on this, it will filter to all of the items that are O1 Pharmacy. Now, notice that all of the rest of the dynamic lists also alter themselves based upon how we are filtering this screen. So the more restrictive I get, the more restricted all of these other choices become, because they're now restricting based upon this date range and these additional filters. Take the filters off, click the X's next to them to remove them. If you create a really cool one, you want to save it and reuse it, rather than having to click on all these every time, don't forget you can make your own custom filters. On this screen, they're also alphabetized by the first character in each one. This also makes for very systematic ways to review the data. So please take advantage of these. If you don't use any of the headers, that's cool. These are really awesome, really powerful, but used in conjunction with the additional headers and how we can filter on other information, we can get a lot more data. And usually I tell people, if there's something you want to see on the screen, there is a way to drive down and see it. You can totally restrict it. Now, that being said, some people want to create multiple filters and do multiple things. You can do that sometimes using labels. There are labels here, service code labels, there's billing entry labels. So if you create custom labels, remember you can use those. If you have contact labels, you can use those. So there's lots of different ways to filter this screen. You'll also notice when you click on the search bar now, they've updated it and they show you all of the different options you have here of different ways to search this screen, aside from the handful of things we can do here. So take advantage of that too. Couple other things about the screen just at first glance is, don't forget, when we come down here, there is a load totals function. It's way at the bottom of the screen. We always do default this screen to 50 items per page to keep the browsers moving quickly. You can load up to 500 at a time. It just takes longer to resolve those. That's why we don't do it by default. When I hit load totals, the other couple cool things are, number one is it does load totals for everything based upon how I am filtered. So April 1st to September 30th tells me how many entries it takes. 68 entries are within that date range, and then all of the totals based upon those 68 entries. So Some of you newer people might not know that when we load totals, it doesn't matter how big your page is. It does matter if you have a filter. If I filtered down to one specific payer, one specific client, I would get the totals based upon that. But the system will summate all pages when we hit load totals. I also like to tell people there's a little quick and dirty. If you like to download this data, what you should get in the download should be 69 rows of data. Why? We give you the 68 rows of data here plus one header row in the export. So it's a real nice quick and dirty to just make sure, hey, do I have the same data set that I'm looking at in Excel here or wherever I'm looking? Couple notes about that as well. Remember, when you download data, if you take it outside the system, depending on how you're connected, you might or might not be in a HIPAA environment. Please bear that in mind when you share data. When you're inside here, we're protecting it. When you take it outside the system, it's on you. Additionally, don't forget, when you click a download anywhere in the system, you're getting a snapshot as of the data at that moment. If after you click this download, I came in as a different employee or whomever as myself, and I changed this one entry from $50 to $49.99, your export doesn't say $49.99. The screen is always live. It is always whatever the current state is as of the moment I refresh the screen. So please remember that. Filters across the top of the screen. Always defaults to all. We have new, invoice, not invoice, paid, outstanding, overpaid, and void. A lot of times people get caught up in the colors versus the filter functionality. So let's talk about that real briefly. The color swatch here does indicate things, but it is not 100% representative of what it is labeled, the color it is next to in the word. The color green means that the balance in the far right column owed equals 0. That's what it means. We're working on getting these words updated. It just takes a lot of time because altering the billing section is obviously the last thing anybody wants to do. Outstanding means that there is a positive number in the owed column. So when you click on outstanding, that is why we get this question often. Well, wait a second, these are orange. They're new. And yes, 100% I agree that they are new. But what outstanding means is that there is a value greater than 0 in the owed column. And so on these orange entries, we do have a value greater than 0. Same thing if you had paid and you had an orange entry that had $0 owed to the system, that is what we call paid or equal to 0. Overpaid, owed column is greater than 0. I don't have anything in this data set to show me that. Also, you can filter on voids. So there's lots of different ways to look at the data. Don't forget also over here under the gear, one of our favorite items when we're troubleshooting things or we get support tickets is preview entry. It's not so much this nor this, it's this history. This tells me about this line. How did this line get here? What happened to it since it got here? Time and date stamps and who did what. If you ever see the word you just very simply means whoever you're logged in as right now. I'm logged as my organization. I made all these changes logged in as the organization. That is the you. If it was somebody else, it would show me their name. Depending on what has been changed, some of the items you will see will have... No, that's not it. They will have a little more history to them. Usually it's when we change a code or change some parameter about it. It will show what it was before the change and when it was after the change. History is all throughout the system too. We don't track and give you every historical event because if we did, you would be overwhelmed in history. But we do track a lot of it and make a lot of that available on the billing screen, in the claims manager, in the contacts module, for example. There's different places you can go and view those histories. When we say new, this is a lot of people's favorite filter when they go to do billing. This is something that nothing has been done with. If I click on the gear here, we get little stats. Here's a new entry. New means nothing's been done. Anything else in this lineup here, if I click on the gear, it's going to tell me some stats about it. Last billed, last paid, what was done to it. These are all hyperlinks too. If you want to go see the 2 claims that this line item appeared on, click it here. It'll take you to the claims module and show them to you. So as we come in, those are some of those different things here. Last thing here is over on the filters, the left sidebar here. Another difference between the timesheet screen and the billing screen, there's a ton more filters here. By default, for example, under status, we show you active and voided. If you want to pull up voided only or deleted entries, you can do so. You just have to tell the system you want them. Are the entries locked? Yes or no? You can also access that filter here. So sometimes there's also multiple ways to do the same thing. Invoices, was an invoice created? Claims, was a claim created? This one's kind of cool because let's say I go, hey, I want to see everything that was not put on a claim. Well, if I click no here, it shows me all the entries for the period I'm looking at that were not placed on a claim. Now, the data here sometimes, depending on your data set, can be a little overwhelming in that how much data do you see? Well, if I'm looking at data that has no claim, it probably makes sense. Anything that does not typically go on a claim, I would not want to see. So for example, I might choose to use this filter in combination with my United Healthcare and say, hey, oh, okay, so this is an insurance company and this did not go on a claim. Okay, so why is the status blue? Well, it looks like the status is blue because an export was generated. Remember, the color swatch does not always exactly equal what's going on with this item. So please feel free to use these as different tools. Another very cool one here under audits. So we usually always talk about the duplicates. Remember, duplicates, same date, same time, same provider, same client, same code. Overlaps by provider and client. Another more advanced feature that has been added a few months ago is the unconverted match. What this is doing is this is letting us know any item on the screen. So based upon my date range, once again, I could also filter down beyond that. Is there anything out on the schedule not yet converted for any given client on the same day? So that's kind of the first layer of looking at this. So if I click this, what this means is that on July 3rd and on April 24th, for these respective clients, there are more appointments on the calendar, on the schedule, that are not yet converted. So this might be an alert to me that prior to billing, I want to get all those items converted. I want all the billing to be here. This is a great tool to use in conjunction with like the not converted list on the schedule grid view, et cetera, et cetera. But this is some more ways that you can help check your billing to make sure it's ready to go out. If you said, hey, okay, this is cool, you can also do the inverse of this filter. So let's say you know that all of these have something else on the schedule, so maybe you choose to hold those. But now, what if you said, hey, I want to bill everything that I can possibly bill? If I switch this to exclude, what this is going to mean is that every client and date of service here does not have anything else on the schedule that has not yet been converted. So there's lots of different ways to use these different screens. If you haven't played with all these filters, come in and tinker. That's usually what I tell people. Once you get some data going, you get a nice diverse data set versus my boring demo account, you can see some really cool things. So that's something about the billing screen. Authorizations. The authorization screen, as we come into this one, it always wants to default around today. So if I'm still in the month of February, it's going to default to February and show me these monthly views. If I want to see a different month, I can always choose my different month. If I want to see just all time, meaning all authorizations, it will default to valid. If I take this off, it will just give me a list of every authorization in the system. That's why we defaulted to valid, because once you're in this system and you've been working for a while, you have lots and lots of different authorizations. The main things to bring up here that we usually like to show everybody is in here is a great management tool, as well as this how the system validates and verifies everything. This screen is accessible if you have the permission to get into it, obviously. It's Authorizations Basic, and it gives you this screen and this screen. There's a limit on this second choice here, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But Authorizations is a fantastic tool for tracking what's going on with your authorizations. Now, that being said, we always like to bring up that there's authorizations in here where you know that the payer does not allow you to bill over XYZ, and you're going to lock down that time based upon some period. There might also be sometimes where it's more flexible, that maybe you have a payer and that payer doesn't care if you bill more than this. That's fine too. There can also be scenarios where we've heard where there's no authorization required. Well, just because there's no authorization required doesn't mean I can't put an authorization in the system. Because don't forget, as well as this being a tool to show us what is authorized, what's worked, what's pending, what's remaining, it can also be a management tool for us to come in and see, hey, how are we doing on contract fulfillment this month? So even if an authorization is not required, maybe you want to put one in based upon the treatment plan that you have and put in that data so that you have some stats, some data to make people accountable for. Very loosely, you come in, you set up the authorization. This is just a report on it. If you have this module and you are connected to the client, you will see their data here. Frequency, authorized, work, pending, remaining. So frequency is how we program the auth. Once means over the duration, beginning date to end date. You can use this time however you want. Monthly is going to specify that, hey, over the period of X month, you have X amount of time. When we look at the different views here, all time and monthly, remember monthly is giving us that monthly aggregate amount. So I'm going to go back in time here a little bit. And so, for example, here we have Ninja Cat. Let's see if we can find some better data. There we go. So here is an authorization for Bella Dog, and it's valid 2/1 to 7/31. I'm looking at July, and that's why it's showing me this. Weekly is going to summate that weekly frequency and give me a total summated amount for the month. So remember, when we look at monthly view, the top line here, authorized, this is the system adding up how many hours are authorized for the month. Now, I also do have prorated turned on. That's why you'll notice this last week of the month that contains one single day contains a prorated amount, because it only has one day that's valid. That's where I'm getting my my amounts from. The worked column is showing how much has been saved as converted timesheets. It's also a hyperlink. If I click it, it opens a new tab and it takes me to that 3/4 of an hour, wherever it might be. So this, once again, is a tool that can help you find stuff. If stuff is on the schedule, that would be pending. And then remaining time is just authorized minus worked minus pending equals remaining. So some things people like to do with this. Let's say March 1st is tomorrow, and I want to come into my authorization screen and I want to see, hey, do we have everything scheduled for March? So I could come in, set this up to monthly, actual prorated, hours, March 2018. And what I'm looking for is I want to see in pending, do I have anything that says 0? 0 means there's nothing on the schedule for the month of March. Well, as a tool, that's fantastic. But what if I have hundreds of these? Don't forget, once again, you have lots of different ways to filter this data. I could say for the month of March, show me anybody who has no pending hours, meaning nothing is on the schedule for the coming month. Well, maybe that's a problem. Maybe it's not. But at least we can try and identify that stuff before the month of March starts. Or what if halfway through the month we went to utilization and we said, hey, I'm going to customize this. Halfway through the month, we should be 50% done with all the hours available in an authorization. Well, I can create custom ways to sort the data, very similar to Excel, that says, hey, show me anything that's 50% or less, 49% or less. And the system can filter to those authorizations that are that. Don't forget, within this screen, you can also filter on additional parameters. We don't have all the different things you can list here, but you can do contact labels, service code labels. So if you wanted, for example, to just group all of your service codes together for direct or supervision, you could have a way to filter this data to look at those in one way versus another. So lots of different ways to use the system to verify and validate and see what's going on with your authorizations. Next screen here, authorizations by Payor Global. This screen is not used that much anymore, and it's been around for a really long time. What this does is this is always looking at the global period. So the global period, when you first set up an auth up at the very top, we talk about the global period. That's where you set the date range, and then you put in the payer. The payer is usually based upon that client. And then we go ahead and we drop the data into the system, and then you set up the specific service codes. So what this screen is doing, and this is also available with Authorizations Basic, the difference between Basic and Full is the addition of this button here, Buy Amount. This shows you dollars. If you have Basic, you don't get the Buy Amount choice. It will not show you dollars. If you have Full, you pick up this one extra button. So what it's doing here, and the only place I have data, because I made sure I inserted some, is I go here, open up my school contracts. I got Bella Dog here. And here's the authorization, and it says 50 hours global. The reason these are zero is because there's no value in the global box. If I go specifically to this authorization then, and I pull it up and go to the Authorizations tab, it's because I've put the 50 hours up here at the global total. So when we talk about authorizations globally, we are referring to this uppermost section. There's a couple different ways to populate the data here. One is you click on the edit pencil. You can manually do this. After you add any codes or multiple codes, code group sets, etc., you can also have the system automatically summate it all, roll up the totals from the groups, and we'll just add them all up and put them in here. This does provide additional validation as well as makes that global screen work. If you want to put in what an authorization is worth, you could put that in and the system will track the dollars. So given that that data is in there, what is it doing? 50 hours authorized. Total number of weeks, total number of months, total use. So this is telling me how many have we billed of this authorization, what remains. What's the recommended utilization? If I want to use all 50 hours in 25.86 weeks or 6.03 months, I should use 1.93 hours per week or 8.29 hours per month. Currently, what are we doing? This is our current stats based upon what the system sees on the schedule. Based upon the remaining value, so when we talk about 50 minus 8 1/4 used, 41 3/4, based upon that, what should we do to use all of the remaining hours during the authorization period? And so it's once again to help you analyze and look at your data. Now it's very high level data. Some people want to analyze more granular than this. You can do that with the authorization screen download and other ways. You can also do this by money, given that once again you put in what something is worth. The system will tell you what you billed, what's remaining in this contract, what your recommended utilization, if we did it, would be to maximize this $6,000 over the total duration, so on and so forth, just looking at it as a monetary thing. So there's some cool different things you can use this for as well. Next one down here, receivables. Receivables is pretty self-explanatory. Don't forget, based upon our choice under miscellaneous, if we have agreed rates turned on or off, we will either see our agreed receivables or our total billed receivables. If we download this screen, it's available right up here at the top right. Once again, we'll get a frozen snapshot at the moment inside the download. Just so you're aware, it's a very large download to give you lots of different ways to look at the data, but you will see both a billed rate receivables and an agreed rate receivables. Both data sets are in there so that you could use those in your outside calculations. You can toggle this screen based upon payer or based upon client. Once again, it's just giving you what is this topmost line. Both screens are fully drillable. If I click on the plus buttons, I can drill down, get into any specific client and the specific entry. Now, the one note I always like to remind people of here on the receivable screen, remember that the billing screen, the primary driving force is that date range. So that is always constrained by a date. This screen is constrained by who owes me money. Is the date in here? Absolutely 100%. It's on these line item entries, and that's also how we create the aging buckets. But when I come here, it's showing me all of the places where people owe me money. One of the things CentralReach does that's a little different that most accounting systems don't is we also take the insurance and the copay and we split them. Meaning, if you place an amount in the copay box, we will track it as a separate part of the entry. So this total line item on 929 is $750 plus $5. That's the total receivable. But what we're saying here is copay. And remember, copay is patient responsibility, is $5. And what we're expecting from the insurance is $750. So once again, $1,250 is the total. Total AR, total amount owed, is $1,250, but the receivable screen has just split it based upon us updating this amount in the box. It's taken the 5 and broken it into the component value of the $5 for patient, $750 for the insurance. This makes it really handy. Also lets us know if we see a huge copay amount and insurance is really low, well, we know who owes us the money. It's patient responsibility. The patient owes us that. Maybe we have a set time of the month that we go chase patient responsibility versus chasing insurance amounts. Couple other items on this screen. If you click on any of the headers, we will sort by that header. Default is just alphabetical by payer, but you can filter it based upon any one of the columns that you want. All of these blue numbers are hyperlinks as well. So for example, if I click on the $149 here for insurance, when I come over here, it will take me to the billing screen, to this specific date range based upon obviously today. And if I hit load totals, there's that amount that's still owed. It was those component values, don't forget, between the 25 and the 180 and the amount owed, etc. So it's all in there. If you want to sort by client, it's in there as well. And so that's the receivables. Once again, remember, constrained by who owes me money. Don't forget, in order to help make this all work, you do have to post your payments inside CentralReach. And so you'd want to post all your payments. And then that brings us into the payment screen as well. So the payment screen is going to show us any payments posted in CentralReach. Unlike an accounting system, there is not some place where we just hold dollar amounts and let you apply them whenever you like. This literally means that somebody has come in and posted to respective line items some amount. Those amounts shown here. System defaults to the 4 main income sources. These are when you select payment type. Those are those different types. If you want the rest of them, they're just hidden underneath here, and you can turn them, toggle them on, toggle them off based upon what you're trying to see. Same thing, there's a download here, and it gives you all that line item data if you want to see it. The 131 here is the system telling us how many line items were posted with the entry. Couple notes about looking at this screen and how this screen is sorted, because we get a lot of questions about this too. What the screen is sorting on is it's sorting on these filters first. Then it sorts on reference numbers. Then it sorts on payers. So if, for example, you have amounts that were part of sales adjustment, bad debt, refund, invoice, activity, etc., and we look for those, it might be that you get more data here. So let's see what we got here. So for example, here's bad debt write-off. Here's invoice, sales adjustment, both as reference number test 4. If I, for example, remove invoice as one of my criteria, it doesn't remove that test 4 is the reference number. But once again, the grouping here is based upon this first. So my only point here being, if you're trying to see all data, pull up all the filters. Also, it sorts on date range and reference numbers. There's a lot of stuff going on. It's very difficult to display everything the way everybody wants to see it. So if you understand a little bit about how we're sorting here on this screen, it can help you find data, or it can make data that looks like maybe it's incongruous. It might help you sort out what's going on here because of the ways we're trying to aggregate this data based upon what you're trying to see. Most of the time what we have here is people want to come in here and they want to search for a specific reference number. And so they're going to pull up that check number. You can use it in the search field. I just clicked on it from the filter here. But this is where you can come in and you can see what's been posted. A lot of people are using this to then go against their bank data and make sure all the deposits are there. But that's some of the different ways you can use this screen. Last one here, or second to last, sales and then invoices. Sales is an aggregated sum of the billing entries. If you go to the billing screen and pull up the same date range, it defaults to the last 30 days, it will show you the same data as line items. This is just summating it. Once again, you can drill down here. If you download this downloads a little different. It's a little more simplified than the billing screen export, but that's what this screen is showing us. Once again, based upon how the toggle is for agreed versus billed, you might or might not see this in the way you're anticipating. So don't forget, based upon that toggle, we show you the sum. If it's agreed turned on, this is agreed rates. If it's agreed turned off, this is bill rates. Last section here, invoices. Invoices is where we store all the invoices that you make. So when we come in here, we will see all the invoices, who they are. In order to make them visible to the client and or payable, we added in functionality so that you can choose when you show something what is payable via the patient portal. You do have to create a download file. So if you go to print and then make the download file, what would happen is on that screen, you can then toggle on or off whether or not you want this to be visible and or payable by the client. Don't forget those caveats based upon the service codes come into play too, of whether or not the client will see the rates. So here I go. I can make this visible to the client. I don't have in my demo account a merchant account. That's why I can't make it payable. But this is toggling on and off the visibility. So if NinjaCat logs in or NinjaCat's parent guardian logs in, they can see this invoice right now. If I toggle it off, they go there, they don't see it. So it helps you control what is seen and unseen. I hope everybody found my quick talking helpful. Thank you so much for your time. If you do have any questions, anything came up, please reach out to your CSL, open a support ticket, let us know. We're always happy and here to help. Thanks so much and have a super day. Bye-bye.